Hello, our friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family.
Hello there, welcome back.
Welcome back, guys. So what we see here is a representation of a very famous person, Amenhotep IV. And so Amenhotep IV, I want to break down that name. Amenhotep. Well, you might recognize the Amen. And Amen. What does Amen mean at the end of a prayer? Origins of Amen. Yes. Well, it's interesting. There's little wikis out there that say Amen is just coincidentally derived from the same root as the Egyptian deity Amen, Amun. And Hotep means peace. Basically, it translates Egyptian roughly to be satisfied, to be at peace. So it's the peace of Amen. And again, Amen, Amun, as you see, Amen, Amun, Amun, Amun-Ra. See, it's an ancient Egyptian god. Now, this is an oversimplification to say of sun and air. And when you see Amun-Ra, one thing that happened over time was merging deities, and deities taking on the position and power and attributes of previous deities. And this is a key understanding that we have to have when we come to looking at how the world got to be where it is now. With so many things being translated as something that they were not originally intended to be translated as. So I just find this is all fascinating. Now, Amenhotep IV was also known as Akhenaten. And so you might know of Akhenaten. He was very, very interesting, to say the least. And many people have said he's got a familiar look to him, doesn't he? Doesn't that face look like you've seen that face somewhere before? Yeah, can't quite place my finger on it. But Amenhotep IV changed his name to Akhenaten, meaning the servant of Aten, during his reign, whereas his father Amenhotep III had sought to reduce the increasing power of the priesthood. Akhenaten practically dismantled it. He started his reign like most Egyptian kings. However, fairly early in his reign, he introduced a monotheistic worship of Aten, the sun god. Now, the interesting thing to note, too, is that depending on where you were at, different deities had different positions. In Sumer, for instance, each city-state had its own patron deity. So when you have, again, that statement saying to Abram, I am the God of your forefathers, that's because he came from Ur of the Chaldees, which was Ur in Sumeria. And they had their own patron deity. Each city-state had its own patron deity. And in fact, this was relatively common. While different deities were recognized as being existent, certain ones were put into positions of preeminence in certain places above others. And so here you had Akhenaten, who was known as Amenhotep IV, changing his name and going to become the servant of Aten. And then what he did was basically do what kind of Catholic Church did and say, okay, guys, we're all worshiping this way, and this is who we're doing it with. Yes. Again, history repeats itself. There's many things that are interesting about him. He was not loved by the power structure, that's for sure. He established himself as a god king. But what is a god king? Again, this is a dead giveaway for those that have watched a few episodes of, Ancient Astronauts. It's a dead giveaway because, again, the gods were just a classification of beings. They were just beings that had more intelligence, understood the way the universe worked, and had way more technology. So he changed the capital, he changed art, he changed a lot of things. He was an absolute, complete radical for his time. And he was, again, not loved by the system. By the way, we do love our Patreons, though.
Indeed, we do love our Patreons. Thank you.
Yes, because you guys make it possible for us to keep moving forward with all this. Another interesting thing you might notice about him, well, he was always kind of pictured with a very soft belly. And in fact, descriptions of him make him seem a little effeminate. And then the real obvious one is the elongated head. Ah, yes, the elongated head. This is ever present in all the depictions of him. And again, you could look to the Pope in the Pope hat and understand there's a reason for this. As we see the two youngins here sitting on the knees, this is very much also, it reminds me of the depiction of the Greek depiction of the gods creating humans. And Prometheus, and again, little humans on the laps of the gods. These guys have elongated heads too, by the way. This is all very, very fascinating. Boy, he looks familiar. I swear I've seen this face before. Doesn't he look familiar to you?
Oh, he sure does.
Well, yeah, we've done some meditating on it and thinking about it. Here's another representation of an elongated head there. Ah, and here he is with Nefertiti. Another picture. Another. If it doesn't feel familiar by now, oh, what's he doing with Moses? Well, again, this is part of the history because many scholars have also said, well, you know, the reign of Akhenaten is maybe 100 years before Moses supposedly led the Israelites out of Israel. And Moses, of course, was just serving one God, and Akhenaten introduced the worship of one God. His reign, by the way, was 17 years, and then everything that he did was undone and reversed as the power shifted back to the priesthoods. So isn't this interesting, too? Because, again, where did Moses lead his people out of? Egypt. And when we say prayers in Christianity, we always end with Amen. Well, this is Amen, Hotep the Fourth. The connections are pretty obvious. As this article says, Jews weren't the first people on record to pitch the one God idea. Oh no, the Egyptians were. At least that's what the archaeological evidence backs them up with. So, you know, again, Akhenaten was also said he was the God's son, as well as the living God on earth. Again, these things, for the scholars, they understand this. The Ramses, again, the Ramses of biblical fame, the Pharaoh, you know, the let my people go Pharaoh, about 100 years later, as we see these depictions. Isn't it fascinating? Again, the headdresses to cover the elongated heads that many people are aware of now. Here is another version. This is from DeviantArt saying, well, is this what he really looked like? And is this what Nefertiti really looked like? You know, people picking up on that E.T. idea.
Yeah, you know, but I think that's still, we're not there. We were there at one point, but not in this era. We weren't really there.
And when we look to this time, we are looking at about 3,000, almost 400 years ago. From everything I could gather, and also just looking at what does the Hindu point of view say about the beginning of the Kali Yuga? There are some that date the Kali Yuga. The traditional way of dating these things is extremely long, like we're talking millions of years. And Sri Yukteswar, who is the teacher of Yogananda, again did a version that makes a lot more sense, I think. And many others view it as making more sense. And the dating of the Kali Yuga would go back to about 3100, a little bit earlier, 3102, 3106 BC. So about 1700 years before the reign of Akhenaten, and maybe 1900 years before Moses, if, you know, all that is correct as far as what we get from the biblical point of view. that's, that is a period of time in that in-between zone where there was the restructuring of society. And it's fascinating, too, as I was just finishing another book on the Sumerians and their point of view of the world's cosmology. There is a definitive change from looking at the deities, looking at these quote-unquote gods as being archetypal forces, to literally they're talked about as if they were with us, and also the tendency for them to rule directly over us. It coincides perfectly with the beginning of the Kali Yuga if you take it as being around 3100 BC. This is when kingship came from on high. This is when, in the Hindu scriptures, the books talk of these beings known as the Asuras, who we would really, again, equate to demonic beings, totally in service to themselves and a dark agenda, literally came down from the sky and took over. And before that, there was this period of the battles of the gods, where there were cataclysmic battles going on that describe these wars in such a way that, again, it makes you feel like Star Wars was happening just in our own very skies, which there is evidence to that effect. And many believe Sodom and Gomorrah was literally advanced weaponry used by extraterrestrials to wipe out whole cities. There are radioactive parts of this earth that have no explanation in the Sinai, and also in other places around the globe. There is definitely massive cataclysm and destruction that we see that one could equate to modern day weaponry being used on the planet. The Brahmastra is a weapon that's spoken of in the Vedas, and is really equated with nuclear warfare. It is said to produce a light 10,000 suns and destroy everything, vaporize everything in its vicinity. This is exactly what we see when we see big nuclear explosions. These heads are very curious, to say the least. But what we have to recognize is the fact that, sure, we do have copycats of the gods going on. We do have people that recognize the ruling class as being humanoid but not human, and they emulated them. But as you can see from this young lady here, her cranial mass is distorted, but it didn't get much larger. It can't get much larger. There's only so much mass. You can shape what's there into a certain shape to represent the heads of the quote-unquote gods, which is perhaps what they were emulating, but you can't make it larger. And what we see when we look at this is a limestone portrait head of one of the daughters of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. So this is from the 18th dynasty, circa 1345 BC. Here, this is definitely a significantly larger head, but there are heads that are much larger than that we have found. So when we look at these representations, we are talking about humanoid beings, but we're not talking about Homo sapiens sapiens. This is from Graham Hancock, and again, he's done so much good work. Dating to the 8th and 7th millenniums, more than 60 skulls since 1950s have been found in the Levant. Now, the Levant is that area that we would recognize as being the Holy Land. Depending on the time period, either Canaan, Palestine, Israel, etc. Sometimes buried under the floors of homes, these were uniquely covered in plaster and filled in with soil, which the faces were painted on and adorned to recreate the face. The most famous collection of skulls were discovered in the ancient city of Jericho. Yes, and the walls came tumbling down. Dated to 7500 BC with evidence of occupation going back at least 12,000 years. Many of these skulls showed various forms of elongation, but they weren't giants. They were elongated, but the beings themselves were not giants. And so you will have some people that say, well, the Israelites exterminated those people that were there in Canaan because they were the offspring of the fallen angels. That's the control system talking to you. That is the control system talking to you. They'll probably say the same things about us in the future. Well, you know, everybody of that generation had to be wiped out because they were all of fallen angels. You know, they'll probably say that of Babylon the Great. So those of us that are here in the U.S. or maybe over in the UK or other NATO nations, well, you know, they had to be exterminated because they were of the fallen angels. No, these were beings of a different type that, for the most part, had much more understanding, knowledge. They remembered the past. And in many cases, you know, yes, these are the offspring of extraterrestrials and extraterrestrials themselves living amongst humans that had to be exterminated by the control system because, you know, they could give away everything that's been covered up.
Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, when I look at these beings and I look at the spiral of the yugas and how things come in and go out, I can see a time and point not too long ago, I want to say no more than 12,000 years ago, where it was very important before so many different types of, quote, gods, unquote, were not going to be able to stay here, but they wanted their lineage here because they wanted to have a way to continue to rule, and then mixing themselves with the humans of that time and allowing that bloodline to continue down. So I think this happens before a change in the era and after. It's like this blending of time that I can see where the beings are very, very different, openly different, and then slowly moving into beings that need to blend in and look the same because it's part of that dark age, keeping the beings, whoever is going to be doing their bidding, they have to keep them in the dark about what's going on.
And this is King Tut's skull. As you can see, it's larger. Now that is offspring again of the same lineage. Princess of Amarna, one of Tut's sisters. You see they have that shape. Yes, the common people mimicked it. And also, as Cindy's saying, we all blended together. We've been blending our DNAs together with other humanoid DNAs for a very long time. If you don't know Brian Forrester, I would seriously recommend subscribing to his channel on YouTube. He's one of the best at uncovering these things. He's done so much work. As you can see, look at the size of this skull. That's not normal size. And we've also seen that where the spinal cord attaches is in a different place. The DNA does not match. You know, again, there's been so many different humanoid beings upon this planet. Their whole existence has been wiped out purposely because they can't have you knowing that this planet is a home to all sorts of refugees from other planets.
Mm-hmm. It is. And that's, you know, they cut the cow from the herd. And that's how they control the cow. So they cut us from the herd and make us feel alone. And while they are definitely ruling behind the scenes, they're also ruling, you know, right in front of us. It's just, it's not labeled. We're not aware of it unless you really want to dig deep and begin to understand the control structure and how that branches off into the families. Well, there's some digging, and I don't feel you're ever going to find the direct dot to dots in this timeline, but it will happen. It will all have to surface.
And this is from Paracas. And again, we find these skulls in Peru. We find them in Bolivia. We find them in Venezuela and Ecuador. And we also find them in the Black Sea area, which is right in the center of the fighting between Ukraine and Russia. Again, they make sure that warfare destroys as much evidence as possible of the past beings that were on the planet. Many of these beings are very nice, you know, and you could feel into their energies. So not everybody with these elongated skulls was, let's just say, of a Gigi bloodlines, because there's many different bloodlines. And again, Brian Forrester, if you want to go deep, get some of his books or just binge watch his YouTube channel. Great job. He does such a good job with uncovering all these things. Then there's the Barry O connection. You know, in case you weren't getting that feeling. Maybe you are now. Yeah. Don't you see? Don't you see? I mean, feel. Maybe I should say that more. Don't you feel? Don't you feel there's some sort of vibratory frequency connection going on here? Yeah, it feels right. It feels right. Well, the leaders of today were the leaders of yesterday, because they're just simply reincarnating back into the same bloodlines time and time again. Sometimes he's the girl, sometimes she's the girl, sometimes they're both the girl, sometimes they're both the guy. You know, again, that's just the reality of things, but the frequency, feel the frequency. Feel the frequency of this. That is interesting, is it not? Can we not see it now? Can we not feel it? Yeah. What do you guys think? I look forward to your comments on all this. Yeah. You know, you ever get the feeling that they were born to rule? Well, it's because they were. They've been groomed because they know who they are. When the Dalai Lama dies, they will go and bring objects to potential new candidates to become the new Dalai Lama, seeing if they can pick out their old items, whether it's their bowl or their spoon, something that resonated with them and was a personal item, so they can distinguish, is this the soul coming back of the last leader? This is what this is. These beings incarnate into the same bloodlines time and time again. Now, if you do understand and the concept of higher self, it doesn't have to be the same individual entity, so to speak, but it could be another aspect of the higher self coming into incarnation. The frequency matches. And it's not just, again, the politicians. It's also the ones that we see in movies, because they're all actors, ultimately. They're all playing roles. They're all helping to manifest this illusion that's around us that keeps us trapped into a system of limitations. Ah, yes, it is a tangled web we weave. Feel into the energy of Putin and this depiction of a very, very famous person. Feel into the energy. Look at the bone structure. For one thing, when we do incarnate, we can see similarities. And, you know, I know of that firsthand as well. Thanking Cindy for helping me to identify my last incarnation. Not as famous as these people by any means, but still, it's fascinating nonetheless. As you see a depiction of Julius Caesar, look at the energy. Can't you see that feels similar? Now, I'm sure we'll have people that dissent honestly and think, nah, I don't buy it. That's fine. And then I'm sure we'll have some of the trolls of the system come in and purposely try to be disruptive too. And that's their job. That's what they get paid for. But yeah, absolutely. Julius Gaius Caesar most definitely resonates frequency-wise with Putin. Is it the exact same soul, or is it in the same soul stream? Can't say for sure, but absolutely. Is it coming from the higher self? It feels like it is the same higher self.
Or it sure does, you know. And then if you look to reincarnation, so many times the blueprint is what is left. And the blueprint, the energetic blueprint that is then born into the 3D, and then that face, that body, those mannerisms, that voice, so many things, you know, come into the 3D just because of the energetic blueprint. Our bodies and our energy bodies are so, they're very important. You know, they have a lot to do with what are we going to look at when, or what are we going to look like when we come back into the 3D, when we decide to come back into the 3D. So it's just all very, very curious. And I was just working with another person last week, and it's like we poked around in his past life and asked some questions, and he found some things, and sure enough, you know, the identity is they look a lot alike. So that's kind of what I find fascinating.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, feel this. Feel this. Oh, the energy, the frequency, it's right there. So how about that guy? Oh, that's going to be another video.
Yeah.
Because the reality is, it feels like the most important thing in this man's life is literally his youngest son. And it feels like his youngest son is somebody that was somebody monumental in past history. And that will be the topic for another video. As always, guys, much love. It is tough. It is tough when we're faced with difficult challenges. And as you see, this little guy is faced with difficult challenges. His parents go in the opposite direction. At the same time, what are you going to do? What are you going to do when you're faced with these mind-blowing facts, with these possibilities, this matrix-busting proposition? Which way are you going to go?
Well, this guy's just going to trick him. Isn't that cute?
It's enough to make your head and your tail spin.
Indeed.
As always, Source bless. Namaste.
Namaste.